Okay, part 3, Patrick. Templeton Peck wants to know, what do you think would be in the government's gambling review, and what would be in his if you were to produce one?
I haven't spent a lot of time looking at what's coming or thinking about it. I haven't got into the detail of exactly where it's pitched of what to expect. But the thing I've said here is that we really want to try to promote the idea that gambling is potentially harmful, like a lot of enjoyable things like alcohol, etc. Nobody should deny that. Nobody should imply that betting on horses is perfect. It's not without risk. But there are levels of harm, and that there is a very strong case to be made that the likes of online slots are a lot more dangerous, that they happen 24/7, they happen a lot more often per minute and that sort of thing, and hence they're a lot more risky. And that's proven in the statistics in terms of the addiction. So the concept that there should be different limits and different restrictions is a very clear one, that you should have, that there is a greater amount of risk in the likes of online slots. Now, potentially horse racing stands to benefit from that. If it successfully makes the case that yes, there is risk, but the risk is lower. Now, this is not a new principle. This is enshrined in law already. If you look at alcohol, bottles of spirits carry greater tax because there's more alcohol, more risk. And if you look at drugs, they're Class A, Class B, Class C, in terms of the level of prohibition where things are actually banned. So there is a strong case to be made there, and horse racing stands to benefit if people come from higher risk activities and get involved in sports gambling, in horse racing and sports. And also that then is a double effect, that if the bookmakers face a situation where people are more restricted in their betting on the likes of online slots and less with horse racing, they move from the current situation where they try to take our punters and convince them to go into casinos to a situation where the reverse may apply. And they say, no, we'd actually prefer you to bet on sport, and they start promoting casino people coming to sport. So I think it's very important to try and make that case. It's got to be done in a very nuanced way of making it clear that no one's saying that horse racing gambling is without risk, but that, as with elsewhere, that there are levels of risk.
Okay, now Tony at Cool Cannon on Twitter would like to know, you'd like to know what type of flat race you would recommend for an individual punter to specialise in. Starting, not everybody will, especially on the flat. I'm very much flat. I've always made little, made no bones about that. Except for suits, it's slightly more technical. So in that first, some people have a choice of flat or jumps. You may try to do both, but you don't have to, because it does pretty much go all year round. Too much of it. Flat racing probably more technical. I do occasionally have a go at the jump people. I've got into trouble again, recently. It's the first time I ever hadn't had a letter printed in the Racing Post. In fairness, I thought it was very unlikely. I wasn't expecting to print it. I was more just doing it for a laugh. But it was also the shortest letter I've ever written. It said, following the wonderful reception for last week's jumps pull-out, is there any chance that you could publish the jumps in an easy-to-remove section on a daily basis? And I did send that to a few people, connected with the jumps world, and they're all furious with me now. But in terms of handicaps or non-handicaps, yes, I think that again suits the personality type. If you're a bit like I said about the artistic creative, if you're somebody who's very analytical, you're more likely to be more interested in handicaps. And if you're somebody that, for example, have made a subjective, more artistic judgment about a horse, from race reading, it might be you favour non-handicaps, because then you might only have that horse and 2 others to assess. It was not as technical as one where you've got 14 if you've got a very strong opinion about one horse. So yeah, I think it depends on your skill set. Okay, now at Frack1 from Twitter, imagine you're playing roulette in a casino on the Vegas Strip. After how many successive reds would you start raising your stake?
I think that depends on what the question means, firstly. So generally speaking, you wouldn't change your stake. But I'm not sure they're implying whether there are lots of reds you'd suddenly want a black, because you think, I think people can think that way. They think that after there's so many reds, it must be time for a black. But black doesn't get more likely, definitely not. So you can say that the chance of 10 consecutive reds is 1 in 1,024. So after 9 reds, surely it's more likely. But 9 reds was 1 in 512 to start with. So you've already got all but the last 50% of the improbability in there. So it still evens, and so you wouldn't change at all. If you wanted to get slightly into the world of game shows and goats and cars and goats, and I'll be very briefly, I promise, there could come a point when you could think about going with red. This is not something you want to devote 10 years to, but if you studied all Las Vegas casinos and started getting statistics, you might eventually, after 10 years of legwork, find a biased wheel. So there could come a point when you got that many reds, you start to think, is there a problem with the wheel here? Now, you never get to a situation where it's 6-4, but you might get to a situation where there was evidence, whether it be dirt or damage or whatever, that you might get a biased wheel. But that's where, again, it's understanding the nuances, that if that were to happen, I think it would be a very time-consuming experiment, but if you just as a sort of a logical exercise, it would depend on where it was. It wouldn't happen at the Bellagio, but maybe in some decent size but smaller out-of-town casino in the suburbs, there might be more likely that the wheel wouldn't be functioning as well and wouldn't be monitored and cared for as well. So it is possible, but no, I wouldn't be. I would be sticking to the view of keeping your stakes very small and assuming it's always evens.
Okay, now Sammy would like to know if you've ever experienced a losing run that made you question whether you'd lost your edge.
Not my long-term edge. I always would have been confident I had a long-term edge, but there certainly are periods in which you might think I might not have an edge today because I'm affected by the results. There could come a point when you just, hopefully I'm okay at that, but not perfect. And there would be times when you just get very frustrated. It might cause you to make the wrong decision some of the time. But that's where I said you've got to double down. Double down not in terms of your stakes. You've got to keep your stakes under control and very likely smaller when you're not going well. And as I say, if it gets problematic, very small, not at all. But double down on the work and just dig yourself out of it. But yes, do be aware there may be periods in which you're performing less well, and definitely build that in with your staking.
Okay, now Philip Ellis would like to know, how do you feel about a punter who backs a form horse that is beaten into second by a prepared touch? Is this fair?
Well, this is something I mentioned obviously last time, that my view has changed on this. There were some people saying, well, is that he landed these 100 to 1 touches. There was only 100 to 1 shot, and that was a horse that only had one previous run when the stable was heavily out of form. But we did have some that were planned gambles, and I've explained the detail behind that. Also, perhaps when I said 10 years ago, I should also mention more like 15 plus years ago. And that's where my view changed, because those started before the exchanges even existed, when the view was that the view of the racing industry and punting industry, gamblers in particular, they loved putting one over there. All the talk was about, oh great, that's one put over the bookmakers. That changed once exchange got going, and gradually the viewpoint changed in those first few years. And it wasn't many years after the exchange started that I stopped that. As I say, I operated one of the rules I was happy with in not giving negative instructions to jockeys and that sort of thing. But I do think that time has changed that, and now that you have punters in those two-way markets, I think in the last 10 years there's been a strong move away from that, and I now support even more strongly the tougher regulations on riding, and the hope that more people in the racing industry will gradually see that in a two-way market that sort of thing is no longer popular. Just to clarify another thing, a couple of people said I'd said that punters love corruption. They don't. I was saying that a now quite long retired trainer had once said that, but I did not support that. That punters don't like that, and that's the point I'm making. That back in the day, people were perhaps more motivated, but I might be able to join in this gamble. But now, as I say, I think the move is moving away from that, and hopefully others will. Okay,
Chris Poole, quite simple. Have you ever been knocked?
Yeah, early on there was one bad incident that it was a sum I think of about £13,000 at a time when that really mattered. Not that it wouldn't matter now, but it mattered more. It was probably 20% of what I had and 40% of the liquid funds that I had, and it was a case I'd been sloppy, because it was somebody I'd met and then not had contact with for a year, somebody quite well known-ish at the time, but I didn't do my homework, and I found out after the situation became problematic that he'd failed to pay a lot of people as much as a year earlier, and I just so that's again comes back to be careful who you trust and check.
Can I ask, is that a bookmaker or a sticker owner?
It wasn't really either of those. It wasn't a bookmaker, but no, it was somebody in the punting world. Yeah.
Okay, now Stephen Robinson, he would like to know, what would Patrick do with inside information he obtained if he knew breaches of the rules of racing were scheduled to take place? For example's sake, if jockeys had colluded beforehand regarding finishing positions.
I don't really get any inside information anymore, or hardly any. The rules are very strict about inside information, that you shouldn't receive, even about positive information, you shouldn't be passing any or receive any, that sort of thing. And I stick literally to the letter of that. I'm quite happy making my own mind up and I operate on that basis of analysing, and if the market moves for inside information, maybe the horse that's less fancied might go to a really good price. So I know that informally lots of people do share bits of positive information, and that there was talk that the authorities are only really interested in lay information, but as I choose to go for the letter of the law, even where I've got horses, in the majority of cases I turn down the information. So for example, in the case of Ralph Beckett, as I mentioned last time, I have horses.
It's Rafe, surely, isn't it, Rafe?
Oh, no, Simon. I think he prefers Ralph. I think he prefers it. I mean, admittedly, he says he doesn't, and quite vociferously, I would say, but I think deep down he probably feels that Ralph makes him more of a man of the people. I think you should probably go with it, Simon. Anybody looking to interview him, but maybe if you're moving in with, are you free for an interview, Ralph? I would maybe just increase your social distancing by, a metre or 3, just to be on the safe side. But anyway, getting back onto that, as I say, in that situation, I've said to the man that not to give me any information, and that I prefer that freedom of being able to make my own mind up, and being completely free as a result. So I do receive a little bit that I'm fully entitled to as an owner, but 99% of my punting would be on no information whatsoever. And I would, certainly in that example of where there was a corrupt situation going on, I would advise people to steer well clear.
Okay, now Jack Adcock would like to know, in your book you mentioned you like Indian food. What is your go-to order at your local curry house?
I would say a garlic chili chicken. We'll have naan bread. Probably keep it simple with an onion bhaji. I think that's a very good barometer of how good a place is. And if I was going all out, probably a mango kulfi afterwards. But if you want me to do the Patrick thing and overanalyze it, I'd say the absolute perfect, if you're willing to put the place to trouble, is rather than just having the chicken in with go for a chicken slashlik. So you get the sizzling plate with all the unctuous food on that that comes sizzling to the table, and then ask for your garlic chili sauce on the side. That gets you the best of both worlds. Then people are saying, well, hang on, what about this health is wealth thing, But that's okay once in a while. All you do is fast the next day. Don't eat anything until, intermittent fasting is really good for you. So don't eat anything until the evening the next day. Then it's guilt-free.
Okay, and finally, Scott Murray. He would like to know, where would you say you rank amongst UK punters, and would you be at the top, or are there others in front of you?
I'd definitely not be at the top. There are others who've operated in the sports markets that are way more liquid, who are way in front of me. So I've done okay, and I wouldn't necessarily swap to, people have said, why don't I go into the city, and wouldn't my skills have been much more productive in more liquid markets? Well, maybe, but there's no proof for that. But also, hellish long hours, whether I wouldn't have had anywhere near as enjoyable a life. It's not all about money. But in terms of if you purely rated the amount of success in gambling, then yeah, there's people way in front of me. And again, people can say, well, what happens if you'd gone into those betting in football or something like that? And if you wound the clock back, maybe, although I've had great experience in horse racing, maybe if I could have foreseen, which I failed to do, where the more liquid markets would be, maybe I could have given that a go. And I might have done okay. But, filling an application form isn't winning or being placed in the tournament. So, I've done okay, so we'll have to be happy with that.
Okay, well, Patrick VEITCH, thank you very much.
No worries.